David Martinez was having a completely ordinary Tuesday afternoon when his whole world tilted sideways. He was sitting at his desk halfway through a spreadsheet that was boring him to tears when his phone rang. The number on the screen was local but unfamiliar. He almost didn't answer it. These days, unknown numbers usually meant spam calls about car warranties or solar panels. But something made him pick up. "Hello, is this David Martinez?" The voice on the other end was professional, clipped, the kind of tone that immediately makes your stomach drop a little. "Yeah, this is David. Who's calling?" "This is Nancy Kowalski. I'm a nurse at St. Mary's Hospital. I'm calling about Elena Reyes. You're listed as her emergency contact." David's hand froze on his mouse. For a second he thought he'd misheard. "I'm sorry, who?" "Elena Reyes. She was brought into our emergency room this morning after a car accident. You're the only person listed in her contact information." Elena. The name hit him like a physical thing, knocking the air out of his lungs. Elena Reyes. He hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in 15 years. 15 years of silence, of carefully not thinking about her, of building a whole life that had nothing to do with the girl he'd loved in college. "Mr. Martinez? Are you still there?" "Yeah, I'm here. I don't understand. There must be some mistake. Elena and I haven't spoken in years. We dated in college, but that was a long time ago." The nurse's voice softened slightly but remained businesslike. "I understand this must be confusing, but you're the name and number in her phone under emergency contact. Right now, she's in critical condition, and we need someone who can come down and possibly make medical decisions if necessary." Critical condition. The word seemed to echo in David's head. He looked around his office at the normal afternoon continuing around him. His co-worker Jerry was laughing at something on his computer screen. Someone was heating up fish in the microwave in the break room, and people were complaining about it in the hallway. Everything was exactly the same as it had been 5 minutes ago, except now Elena was lying in a hospital bed somewhere, and apparently he was the person they'd called. What happened to her? David heard himself ask. There was an accident this morning on Highway 101. A truck ran a red light. Miss Reyes was rushed here with significant injuries. I can't give you more details over the phone, but her condition is serious. Is there any way you could come to the hospital? David's mind was racing. Elena, after all these years. The last time he'd seen her was at the airport, watching her walk through security toward a new life in Boston. She'd gotten her dream job at a consulting firm, and he'd been left behind to finish his degree. They'd tried to make long-distance work for about 6 months before it all fell apart in a series of painful phone calls and unsent emails. The end had been messy, full of hurt feelings and things said in anger that couldn't be taken back. And now she was in a hospital, alone, and his was the number they'd called. "Mr. Martinez?" "Yeah, I'll come. I'll be there in about 30 minutes. He hung up and sat staring at his computer screen without seeing it. Why would Elena still have him listed as her emergency contact after 15 years? Had she simply never updated it? Or had there been a reason? The thought made something twist uncomfortably in his chest. "Hey, you okay?" Jerry's voice broke through his thoughts. His co-worker was standing at the edge of his cubicle, holding a coffee mug and looking concerned. "You look like you've seen a ghost. I need to leave early. Family emergency." The lie came automatically, though he wasn't sure why he'd said it that way. Elena wasn't family. She was barely even a memory anymore, just someone he'd carefully packed away in the back of his mind years ago. His manager approved the time off without much fuss, and 20 minutes later, David was sitting in his car in the hospital parking lot, trying to understand how he'd gotten here. The building loomed in front of him, all glass and concrete, and somewhere inside was Elena, the girl who used to steal his hoodies, the girl who laughed so hard at her own jokes that she'd snort, the girl who'd chosen her career over him and broken his heart so thoroughly that he'd sworn he'd never let anyone that close again, though he had let someone close eventually. Amy, his girlfriend of 2 years, who knew almost nothing about Elena, except that there had been a serious relationship in college that ended badly. Amy didn't even know Elena's name, and now David was about to walk into a hospital to see his ex-girlfriend, to possibly make medical decisions for her, and he had no idea how to explain this to Amy. He pulled out his phone and stared at it. He should call Amy, tell her what was happening. But what would he even say? And what was happening exactly? He didn't know yet. David got out of the car and walked toward the entrance. The automatic door slid open with a soft whoosh. The hospital smell hit him immediately. That particular combination of cleaning products and something else he could never quite identify. Sickness, maybe. Fear. The fluorescent lights were too bright, making everything feel surreal and dreamlike. The woman at the information desk directed him to the ICU on the 4th floor. As he rode the elevator up, David caught sight of his reflection in the metal doors. He looked older than he felt. 37 now, with the beginnings of gray at his temples. He'd put on some weight, filled out from the skinny college kid he'd been. Would Elena even recognize him? The ICU waiting room was small and depressing, with uncomfortable chairs and outdated magazines scattered on side tables. A few other people sat in various poses of worried waiting, staring at their phones or the television mounted on the wall. David approached the nurse's station, where a tired-looking woman in scrubs was typing on a computer. "I'm David Martinez. I got a call about Elena Reyes." The nurse looked up and her face shifted into an expression of relief. "Oh, thank goodness. We've been trying to reach any family or friends. Let me page Dr. Patel. He'll want to talk to you." She picked up a phone and had a brief conversation, then gestured for David to take a seat. "He'll be right out." David sat, his leg bouncing nervously. He pulled out his phone again and opened his text messages with Amy. Started typing several times. Deleted each attempt. "How did you explain this?" There was no way to make it not weird. "Mr. Martinez?" David looked up to see a man in a white coat approaching. He was younger than David expected, maybe early 40s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I'm Dr. Patel. I've been treating Miss Reyes since she came in this morning. Thank you for coming down." They shook hands and Dr. Patel gestured to a quieter corner of the waiting room. When they sat, the doctor pulled out a tablet and opened what looked like medical charts. "First, I need to verify your relationship to the patient." "You are?" "Her ex-boyfriend. From college, about 15 years ago." Saying it out loud made it sound even more absurd. "I don't know why I'm her emergency contact." "We haven't spoken in years." Dr. Patel nodded, making a note on his tablet. "Unfortunately, that's not uncommon. People forget to update their information. But right now, you're all we have. Miss Reyes has no other emergency contacts listed. We've tried to find family members but haven't had any success yet." "No family." David felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name. Elena's parents had been alive when he knew her, though they'd lived across the country. Had something happened to them? "What's her condition?" David asked. Dr. Patel's expression grew more serious. "She has multiple injuries from the accident. Several broken ribs, a fractured collarbone, and significant bruising. But our main concern is the head trauma. She has a traumatic brain injury and she's been unconscious since she arrived. We've stabilized her, but the next 48 hours are critical. We're monitoring for brain swelling and other complications." David felt cold. "Is she going to be okay?" "It's too early to say with certainty. Brain injuries are unpredictable. She could wake up in a few hours with no lasting effects or—" Dr. Patel paused. "We need to be prepared for all possibilities. That's why we need someone here who can make medical decisions if it becomes necessary. I can't make those decisions. I don't know her anymore. I knew her 15 years ago, but people change. I have no idea what she would want. I understand this is difficult. We're still searching for other family members or closer friends, but for now, you're what we have. Would you like to see her?" David wasn't sure he did. Part of him wanted to walk out of this hospital, get back in his car, and pretend this phone call had never happened. Let someone else deal with this impossible situation, but he couldn't do that. Whatever had happened between them, whatever pain and anger had marked the end of their relationship, he couldn't just leave her alone in a hospital bed with no one. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I'll see her." Dr. Patel led him through a set of double doors into the ICU proper. The rooms were separated by glass walls, each containing a bed surrounded by machines. Monitors beeped softly and nurses moved quietly from room to room. The doctor stopped in front of one of the rooms. "She's in here. Take your time." David stepped into the room and his breath caught in his throat. There she was. Elena. After 15 years of wondering, of deliberately not looking her up on social media, of pretending that part of his life had never happened, there she was. She looked smaller than he remembered, fragile in the hospital bed. Her black hair was shorter than she'd worn it in college, cut to her shoulders. There was a bandage on her forehead, and her left arm was in a cast. Tubes and wires connected her to various machines, and the steady beep of the heart monitor filled the quiet room. Her face was bruised, but even battered and unconscious, he could see her. The curve of her cheek, the shape of her nose. Elena. David sank into the chair beside her bed, not sure what he was feeling. It was too much all at once. Shock, confusion, an echo of old anger, and underneath it all, a deep sadness he hadn't expected. "What did you do, Elena?" he whispered. "Why do you still have my number after all this time?" She didn't answer, of course. Just lay there breathing steadily, the machines tracking every heartbeat. David leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Amy asking when he'd be home for dinner. He had no idea how to answer that either. David sat in that uncomfortable hospital chair for what felt like hours, though when he checked his phone, only 20 minutes had passed. The room was quiet except for the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor and the soft hiss of the oxygen machine. He found himself watching Elena's chest rise and fall, reassured by each breath even as the situation felt increasingly surreal. He'd texted Amy back finally, keeping it vague. "Something came up at work, might be late. Don't wait for dinner." It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. He'd tell her everything later, when he understood it himself. A soft knock on the doorframe made him look up. A woman stood there, maybe in her 50s, wearing business casual clothes with a hospital badge clipped to her belt. She had kind eyes and a gentle smile that somehow made David feel like he was about to get bad news. "Mr. Martinez, I'm Grace Thompson, one of the social workers here at St. Mary's. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" David glanced at Elena, then back at Grace. "Sure. Should we step outside?" "That would be good." They walked to a small consultation room down the hall. It was clearly designed to deliver bad news, with soft lighting and a box of tissues prominently placed on the table. Grace sat across from him and opened a folder. "First, I want to thank you for coming. I know this must be incredibly strange for you, given your history with Miss Reyes." "That's putting it mildly," David said. "Has anyone else been contacted? Family, friends?" Grace shook her head slowly. "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about. We've been trying to piece together Miss Reyes's life, and it's proving difficult. Her phone has very few contacts. Her work knows her, but they said she kept to herself mostly. We found an address for her apartment, and the building manager said the same thing. Nice woman, always paid rent on time, but quiet. Kept to herself." David felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What about her parents?" "She had parents. They lived in New Mexico when I knew her." Grace's expression softened even more, which told David the answer before she spoke. "According to what we've found, both of her parents passed away. Her mother 7 years ago, her father about 4 years ago." The information hit David harder than he expected. He remembered Elena's mother, Rosa, who'd sent care packages during finals week filled with homemade cookies. Her father, Miguel, who'd taught David how to play dominoes during one memorable Thanksgiving. Both gone, and Elena had dealt with that alone. Did she have siblings? Other family? She was an only child. We're still searching, but so far it looks like she didn't have much family left. No aunts or uncles in the area, at least none that she stayed in contact with. David ran his hand through his hair, trying to process this. The Elena he'd known had been vibrant, surrounded by friends, always laughing. What had happened to turn her into someone so isolated? What about a husband? Boyfriend? Someone? No indication of that either. No ring, no photos in her wallet except... Grace pulled out a plastic bag from her folder. Inside was a worn leather wallet. "We found this in her personal effects. There's a photo inside I thought you should see." She opened the wallet through the plastic and showed him the picture slot. David's heart stopped. It was them. Him and Elena, probably 22 years old, sitting on a bench somewhere on campus. He had his arm around her shoulders and she was laughing at something. Her head tilted back in that way she used to laugh when she was genuinely happy. He remembered that day vaguely. It had been spring, one of those perfect days where everything felt possible. She kept that. The words came out barely above a whisper. It's been in her wallet from what we can tell. The photo's pretty worn, like it's been looked at often. David stared at the picture, at their younger, happier faces. "I don't understand. We broke up 15 years ago. It wasn't friendly. We said horrible things to each other. She moved across the country and never looked back. Why would she keep a picture of us?" Grace closed the wallet gently. "People are complicated, Mr. Martinez. Sometimes we hold on to things even when we think we've moved on." The question now is, what do we do moving forward? You're currently her only contact, which means if difficult decisions need to be made about her care, that responsibility falls to you. I can't make those decisions. I told Dr. Patel that. I don't know her anymore. I knew her 15 years ago, but I have no idea who she became. I understand. But legally, you're what we have right now. I need to ask you some questions about what you remember. Did Elena have any strong feelings about medical care, religious beliefs that might impact treatment decisions? Anything you remember that might help guide us? David thought back to their college days. She was Catholic, but not super religious. We went to church together a few times, mainly for her mother's sake when her parents visited. She believed in God, but wasn't strict about it. As for medical stuff, he paused, a memory surfacing. Her grandmother died from cancer when Elena was in high school. She told me once that watching her grandmother suffer through treatments that didn't work was one of the hardest things she'd ever experienced. She said she'd never want to be kept alive if there was no real hope. That quality of life mattered more than just breathing. Grace made notes. That's helpful. Anything else you remember? She wanted to make a difference. That was her big thing. She used to talk about wanting to do work that mattered, that helped people. That's why she took the job in Boston, actually. It was with some big consulting firm that did international development work. She thought she'd be changing the world. David heard the bitterness in his own voice and tried to soften it. I guess I don't know if she stuck with that. Actually, Grace said, pulling out another paper from her folder, we contacted her employer. She works for a nonprofit called New Horizons Community Services. She's a case manager working with immigrant families, helping them navigate housing, legal services, and social support. According to her supervisor, she's been with them for about 3 years and is one of their most dedicated workers. David absorbed this information, so Elena had ended up doing exactly what she'd always wanted, just not in the way either of them had imagined. Not in some big consulting firm, but in the trenches, working directly with people who needed help. Why did she come back here? David asked. To this city? She left for Boston. We don't have those details yet, but she's been living here for about 3 years, it seems. 3 years. Elena had been in the same city as him for 3 years, and he'd never known. They'd never run into each other at a grocery store or a coffee shop. This city wasn't that big. Had she known he was here? Had she seen him and turned away? A thought struck him suddenly. If she moved back 3 years ago, why didn't she update her emergency contact? I mean, she must have made new friends here, co-workers, someone. Grace's expression was carefully neutral. That's a question only Miss Reyes can answer. But sometimes people hold on to certain connections even when those connections seem to exist only in the past. David's phone buzzed again. This time it was his boss asking if everything was okay. He typed back a quick response, then looked at Grace. What happens now? Now we wait and hope she wakes up. Dr. Patel is optimistic about her chances, but with brain injuries, we never know. In the meantime, I'd suggest you think about whether you're willing to stay involved. This could be for the long haul. Recovery from injuries like this doesn't happen overnight. Can I see her again? Of course. Take all the time you need. David walked back to Elena's room, his mind churning. The hallway seemed longer this time, each step heavier. When he entered, nothing had changed. Elena lay exactly as he'd left her, still and silent except for the machines tracking her life. He sat down again and really looked at her this time. She was 37 now, same as him. There were tiny lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. Her hands, resting on top of the white hospital blanket, looked capable and strong. Working hands. These weren't the hands of someone who'd spent 15 years in an office. They were hands that did real work, that helped people. What happened to you? David asked the quiet room. What happened to us? His mind drifted back to their last real conversation, the one that had ended everything. It had been over the phone, 6 months after she'd moved to Boston. She'd called him late at night, crying, saying the job wasn't what she'd thought it would be, that she was lonely and missed him. He'd been studying for finals, stressed and angry about being left behind, and instead of being supportive, he'd snapped at her. Told her she'd made her choice and had to live with it. Told her she couldn't have it both ways. She'd gotten quiet then, that particular kind of silence that meant she was hurt. You're right, she'd said finally, her voice flat. I made my choice. I guess you've made yours too. They'd hung up and that had been it. No dramatic final confrontation. No closure. Just silence that stretched into weeks, then months, then years. He'd heard through mutual friends that she'd stayed in Boston, that she was doing well. Eventually, he'd stopped asking. He'd moved on, or at least he'd thought he had. David pulled out his phone and, before he could second-guess himself, opened a search engine. He typed in Elena's name in the city. A few results came up. A professional profile for New Horizons Community Services with her photo. She was smiling in the picture, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. He clicked through to the organization's website. There was a news article from last year about an award ceremony. Elena had received recognition for her work with refugee families. Miss Elena Reyes has been instrumental in helping over 50 families successfully resettle in our community. The article quoted her supervisor as saying, "Her dedication goes beyond her job description. She treats every family like they're her own." There were other articles too. A community newsletter mentioned her volunteering at an ESL program on weekends. Another piece talked about a fundraiser she'd organized for a family whose apartment had burned down. Elena had been here in his city doing good work, touching lives, and he'd had no idea. His phone rang, making him jump. It was Amy. "Hey," he answered, stepping out of the room into the hallway. "Hey yourself. You said you'd be late, but it's almost 8. When are you coming home?" David looked at his watch, surprised. It was 8 already. Where had the day gone? "I don't know. Something complicated came up." "What kind of complicated?" "You're being really vague, and it's kind of freaking me out." He couldn't avoid this anymore. An old friend from college was in a car accident. They called me because I'm listed as her emergency contact. I'm at the hospital. There was a pause on the other end. "Her?" "Yeah, we dated in college. It ended a long time ago, but apparently she never changed her contact information. She doesn't have family here, so I'm kind of it right now." Another pause, longer this time. "Okay, that's weird, but okay. Is she going to be all right?" "I don't know yet." "It's serious. Do you need me to come down there?" David thought about it. Part of him wanted Amy there, wanted the support. But another part wasn't ready for those two worlds to collide yet. "No, I'm okay. I just need to make sure she's stable, then I'll head home." "All right. Call me if you need anything." After they hung up, David felt guilty. Amy was being understanding, but he could hear the questions in her voice. Questions he didn't have answers to yet. He went back into Elena's room. The nurse who'd called him earlier, Nancy, was checking the monitors. "How is she?" David asked. "Stable." "That's good. Her vitals are strong. We just need her to wake up now." Nancy adjusted something on one of the machines. "You don't have to stay all night, you know. You should go home, get some rest. We'll call if anything changes." "In a bit," David said. "I just need a little more time." Nancy smiled sympathetically and left. David settled back into the chair. Outside the window, the sky was darkening. Another day ending. Somewhere out there, people were going home to their families, eating dinner, watching television, living their normal lives. And here he was, sitting vigil over a woman he'd once loved, whose life had become a mystery he was only beginning to unravel. He looked at Elena's face, peaceful in unconsciousness, and wondered what she'd been thinking when she got in her car this morning. Had she been going to work? Coming home? Had she been happy, lonely? Did she ever think about him? "I'm here," he said quietly. "I don't know why you kept my number, and I don't know what happens next. But I'm here. You're not alone." The heart monitor continued its steady beep. Elena breathed in and out, and David sat in the gathering darkness, keeping watch over a past he thought he'd left behind, waiting for answers only she could give. David went home that night around 10, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with being physically tired. Amy was still awake, sitting on the couch with her laptop, though he could tell she'd been waiting for him. She closed the computer as soon as he walked in. "How is she?" Amy asked, her voice careful. "Still unconscious. They say the next couple days are critical." David dropped his keys on the counter and sank into the chair across from her. "This is so messed up. Do you want to talk about it?" He did, and he didn't. How could he explain something he barely understood himself? "Her name is Elena. We dated for 3 years in college. When she graduated, she got this amazing job offer in Boston, and I still had a year left. We tried long distance, but it fell apart. We said some pretty horrible things to each other at the end. And you haven't talked since?" "Not once. 15 years of nothing. And now I'm her emergency contact and she has nobody else. Her parents are dead. No siblings. No husband or boyfriend that anyone knows about. Just me. Someone she hasn't spoken to since we were kids. Amy was quiet for a moment. That's really sad. For her, I mean. To be that alone? Yeah. David rubbed his face. The thing is, she's been living here for 3 years. In our city. And I never knew. We never ran into each other. Do you wish you had? It was a fair question, and David didn't have a good answer. I don't know, maybe. I spent so long being angry at her. And then I just kind of forgot about her, you know? Moved on. Built a whole life that had nothing to do with that relationship. And now it's all back. And I don't know what I'm supposed to do with it. Amy came over and sat on the arm of his chair, putting her hand on his shoulder. You do what you can. You make sure she's taken care of. And then when she wakes up, you figure out the rest. What if she doesn't wake up? Then you deal with that too. But one step at a time, okay? David covered her hand with his. I'm sorry this is happening. It's not your fault. It's just life being weird and complicated. She kissed the top of his head. Come to bed. Tomorrow will be easier if you actually sleep. But sleep didn't come easily. David lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about Elena in that hospital bed, about the photo she'd kept in her wallet, about the life she'd built that he knew nothing about. When he finally did sleep, his dreams were confused tangles of past and present, of old arguments and hospital machines. The next morning, he called his boss and asked for the rest of the week off. He'd been with the company for 8 years and barely ever took sick days. They gave him the time without much question. By 9 o'clock, he was back at the hospital with coffee and a growing sense that his life was being pulled in a direction he hadn't planned for. Elena looked the same. Still unconscious, still breathing with the help of machines. Dr. Patel came by during morning rounds and said her brain swelling hadn't worsened, which was good, but she still showed no signs of waking up. Grace Thompson found him around 10. Mr. Martinez, I wanted to let you know we've contacted Miss Reyes's workplace. Her supervisor, a woman named Yolanda Chen, is coming by this afternoon. She might have more information about Elena's life that could be helpful. That's good. Thanks. Also, Grace hesitated slightly. We have Miss Reyes's personal belongings. Her phone, her purse, the things she had with her during the accident. Normally we'd wait for family, but given the circumstances, would you be willing to look through them? There might be contacts we missed or information that could help us understand her wishes regarding her care. David's stomach tightened. Going through Elena's things felt invasive, like reading someone's diary. But what choice did they have? Yeah, okay. I can do that. Grace brought him to a small office and placed a clear plastic bag on the table. Inside were the mundane pieces of someone's daily life. A black leather purse, a smartphone with a cracked screen, car keys with a worn rabbit's foot keychain, a reusable water bottle. David remembered Elena had always been conscious about the environment, carrying her own bags and bottles everywhere. Take your time, Grace said. If you need anything, I'll be at my desk. After she left, David sat staring at the bag for a long moment. Then he pulled it open and started with the phone. The screen was badly cracked from the accident, but it still turned on. Thankfully, it wasn't password protected, or had a simple swipe lock that still worked. He opened her contacts list. It was shockingly short. Her work, a few names he didn't recognize, a dentist, a doctor, a place called Chen's Grocery, and there, near the top under emergency contact, was his name and his number. The number he'd had since college, that he'd somehow never changed. David went through the other names, writing them down. Most seemed to be professional contacts. There was one labeled apartment manager, and another that just said volunteer coordinator. Nothing that screamed close friend or confidant. Her photo gallery was more revealing. Lots of pictures of other people. Children, families, groups of people who looked like they were from different countries. There were photos from what looked like community events, ESL classes, celebration dinners. In many of the photos, Elena was in the background or on the edge of the group, smiling but not quite part of the circle. Always helping, but somehow apart. Then David found a folder that made his breath catch. It was labeled simply Before. Inside were old photos, most of which he recognized. Pictures from college. The two of them at football games, at parties, studying in the library. Group shots with friends they'd shared. There was even a photo of them at graduation, his graduation, taken just a few months before everything fell apart. They looked so young and happy with no idea what was coming, but there was something else in that folder. Newer photos, ones that confused him at first. A picture of a coffee shop he recognized, the one near his office. A photo of the park where he sometimes jogged on weekends. A street corner he passed every day on his commute. And then he understood. These weren't random photos. Elena had been taking pictures of his places, the locations where he existed in this city. She'd been keeping track of him in some way, even without making contact. His hands were shaking as he set the phone down. What did this mean? Had she been stalking him? No, that wasn't the right word. The photos were of places, not of him specifically. But she'd clearly known where he was, how to find him if she'd wanted to. And she'd chosen not to. David opened her purse next. Inside was a worn leather wallet, the same one Grace had shown him with their photo. Her driver's license showed an address across town. Some cash, a couple of credit cards, an insurance card, a grocery store loyalty card. Normal things, but tucked in one of the small pockets was a folded piece of paper. The paper was soft with age, like it had been folded and unfolded many times. David carefully opened it. It was a letter, written in Elena's handwriting, though the ink was faded. "Dear David," it began. His heart started pounding. "I know I'll never send this letter. I've written you dozens over the years, and I've never sent any of them. But I need to write it anyway. Need to say the things I never said when I had the chance. I was wrong about so many things. I thought the job was what mattered, that the career was the path to making a difference. I thought I had to choose between love and purpose, and I chose purpose. But I was wrong. The job in Boston was everything I thought I wanted and nothing I actually needed. I spent 5 years there, working for a company that talked about changing the world while really just making rich companies richer. I was miserable, but I couldn't admit it. Couldn't admit that I'd given up the best thing in my life for something that turned out to be hollow. By the time I realized it, too much time had passed. I'd said such terrible things to you on that last phone call. I'd accused you of not supporting my dreams, of being selfish. But you were right. I was the one who wanted it both ways. I wanted you to wait for me while I chased something that turned out to be an illusion. I came back 3 years ago. Mom and Dad were both gone by then. Cancer took Mom, and Dad just kind of faded away after she died. I handled their deaths alone because I didn't know how to reach out to anyone anymore. I'd become very good at being alone. I took the job with New Horizons because I wanted to actually help people, not just talk about it in boardrooms. The work is hard and doesn't pay much, but it's real. Every family I help feels like a small redemption for the years I wasted. I know you're here in the city. I've seen you, actually, 3 times in 2 years. Once at that coffee shop on 5th Street. You were meeting someone for what looked like a work thing. Another time at the grocery store, you were buying ice cream and talking on your phone, laughing about something. The 3rd time was in the park. You were jogging with a woman. She was pretty and you looked happy. I didn't approach you any of those times. What would I say? Sorry I broke your heart 15 years ago, just wanted to say hi. You've moved on. You have a life. You look happy, and I have no right to interrupt that happiness with my regrets. But I never changed your number in my phone. I've kept it there. This tiny connection to a version of myself that was better, happier, more whole. Sometimes late at night, I pull up your contact and just look at it. I never call. I never will. But knowing that I could, that the possibility exists, somehow makes me feel less alone. I hope you're happy. David. I hope you found someone who didn't make you choose, who didn't throw away what you had for something that didn't matter. You deserved better than what I gave you. I'm sorry. For everything, always, Elena. The letter was dated 6 months ago. David read it twice, then a 3rd time, his eyes burning. She'd seen him. Multiple times. She knew about Amy, knew he'd moved on and she'd stayed away. She'd carried this regret for years and never said a word. He folded the letter carefully and put it in his pocket. Grace had said to look for information that might help understand Elena's wishes. This letter didn't do that exactly, but it explained so much about the lonely life she'd been living. A knock on the door made him look up. A woman stood there, probably in her 40s, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a ponytail. Are you David Martinez? I'm Yolanda Chen. I work with Elena at New Horizons. David stood and shook her hand. Thanks for coming. They sat and Yolanda immediately said, How is she? The hospital wouldn't tell me much. Still unconscious. Brain injury from the accident. They're monitoring her. Yolanda's eyes filled with tears. Elena is one of the best people I've ever worked with. She cares so much about her families. Last month, she spent her own money to buy winter coats for a family of refugees from Syria. Didn't tell anyone, just did it. How well do you know her? David asked. Outside of work, I mean. Yolanda paused. Not as well as I'd like. Elena is wonderful at her job, but she keeps her personal life very private. We've invited her to dinners, parties, team events. She comes sometimes, but she never really opens up. It's like there's a wall around her personal self. Did she ever mention me? Or her past? Not specifically. But once we were working late on a case together, and we got to talking about life and choices. She said something that stuck with me. She said that sometimes we make decisions that seem right at the time, but they end up costing us more than we ever imagined. She said the hardest thing in life was living with the consequences of our own choices. David felt the weight of the letter in his pocket. Did she seem happy? Happy, I don't know. Fulfilled, maybe. Content with her work. But there was always a sadness in her eyes, like she was carrying something heavy that she couldn't put down. Yolanda wiped at her eyes. I wish I'd pushed harder to get to know her better. I had no idea she didn't have any family. No idea she was this alone. They talked for another half hour. Yolanda shared stories about Elena's work, about the families she'd helped, about her dedication and kindness. She painted a picture of a woman who gave everything to others while keeping herself carefully locked away. After Yolanda left, David went back to Elena's room. He pulled the letter out of his pocket and read it again while watching her breathe. All this time she'd been carrying this guilt, this regret. All this time she'd been alone with it. I found your letter, he said quietly to her still form. I understand now. At least I think I do. His phone buzzed. Amy checking in. He texted back that he was fine, still at the hospital, would be home for dinner. Normal words for a situation that was anything but normal. David looked at Elena's face, at the machines keeping track of her life, and felt something shift inside him. Anger at her for the past, yes, but also sadness for what she'd been living with. And underneath it all, a strange sense of connection to this woman who was both a stranger and someone he'd once known better than anyone. You should have called, he whispered. You should have said something. We could have at least been friends. But even as he said it, he knew why she hadn't. She'd seen him happy with Amy, had decided that his happiness was more important than her need for forgiveness. She'd stayed away to protect him from her regrets, and now here they were, brought back together by chance in a car accident and a phone number she'd never been able to let go of. The sun moved across the sky outside the window. Nurses came and went. Machines beeped. And David sat with Elena's secrets, trying to understand how two people who'd once meant everything to each other had ended up here, in this strange and painful place. The call came at 2 a.m. on the third day. David was asleep, or trying to be, when his phone lit up the dark bedroom. He grabbed it before the second ring, his heart already racing. Hospital calls at 2 a.m. were never good news. Mr. Martinez, this is Dr. Patel. I need you to come to the hospital. Miss Reyes's condition has changed. David was already pulling on clothes before the doctor finished talking. What happened? Is she awake? Please just come as quickly as you can. We'll explain everything when you get here. The drive to the hospital was a blur. The streets were empty at this hour, just streetlights and the occasional truck making late-night deliveries. David's mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. Amy had wanted to come with him, but he'd told her to stay home. He didn't know why. Maybe because whatever was happening felt like something he needed to face alone. Dr. Patel met him at the ICU entrance, and David's stomach dropped at the expression on his face. This was the look doctors had before delivering the worst news. What's going on? Let's sit down. I don't want to sit down. Just tell me. Dr. Patel nodded, respecting that. Miss Reyes developed increased intracranial pressure a few hours ago. Despite our interventions, the swelling in her brain has worsened significantly. We've done another CT scan and the results are concerning. Concerning how? The swelling is putting pressure on critical areas of her brain. We have options for further intervention, including surgery to relieve the pressure, but I need to be honest with you about the risks and potential outcomes. David felt cold despite the warm hospital air. Tell me. Even with surgery, there's significant risk. The procedure itself could cause more damage. And even if she survives it, the extent of brain injury she's already sustained means there's a high probability of severe permanent neurological damage. We're talking about the possibility of a persistent vegetative state, or at best significant cognitive and physical impairments. The words seemed to come from very far away, and without the surgery, Dr. Patel's expression was gentle but clear. Without intervention, given the current rate of swelling, she likely won't survive more than another day or two. We could transition to comfort care, make sure she's not in pain, and let nature take its course. So either she dies or she lives in a way that might not be living at all. I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear. David leaned against the wall, feeling like his legs might give out. I can't make this decision. I shouldn't have to make this decision. I don't know her anymore. I don't know what she'd want. I understand. But legally, you're her medical proxy right now. We need a decision within the next few hours. Can I see her? Of course. David walked to Elena's room on autopilot. She looked different now. The machines around her seemed more urgent, beeping with a rhythm that sounded alarmed. Her face had changed too. Something about the way her features had relaxed, making her look further away than she'd been before. He sank into the chair beside her bed and put his head in his hands. How had this become his responsibility? 3 days ago, he'd been living a normal life. He'd been happy, or at least content. And now he was sitting here having to decide whether someone he'd once loved lived or died. His phone buzzed. A text from Amy. Thinking of you. Whatever you need. David stared at the message for a long moment, then pulled out the letter he'd found in Elena's wallet. He'd been carrying it with him, rereading it whenever he felt lost. He looked at the words again. I've become very good at being alone. Was that what Elena would want? To be kept alive in a state where she couldn't work, couldn't help the family she'd dedicated herself to, couldn't be the person she'd fought so hard to become, or would she prefer to let go? To be free of the loneliness and regret she'd carried for so long. But what if there was a chance? What if the doctors were wrong and she could recover? What if she woke up and had years of life ahead of her? A chance to finally find the happiness she'd been missing. David's hands were shaking. This was impossible. No one should have to make this choice. A soft knock made him look up. Grace Thompson stood in the doorway, even though it was nearly 3 a.m. Dr. Patel called me. I thought you might need someone to talk to. I can't do this, David said, his voice breaking. I can't decide whether she lives or dies. That's not fair. That's not something anyone should have to do. Grace came in and sat in the other chair. You're right. It's not fair. But sometimes life puts us in impossible positions, and we have to do the best we can with imperfect information. What if I choose wrong? There is no wrong choice here, David. There's only what you honestly believe she would want based on what you know about her. But I don't know her. Not anymore. I knew her 15 years ago when we were kids. People change. She changed. She built a whole life I knew nothing about, that's true. But you also found her letter. You talked to her supervisor. You've learned about the woman she became. What do those things tell you? David thought about Yolanda's words. About Elena spending her own money on winter coats for refugee families. About her dedication to her work to making a real difference. About the sadness in her eyes that came from carrying regret and loneliness for so long. She wanted her life to matter, David said slowly. She wanted to help people. That's what drove her, not money or success or comfort, but making a difference. And if she couldn't do that anymore, if she was trapped in a body that couldn't move and a mind that couldn't think, would that be the life she'd want? David felt tears burning his eyes. No, I don't think it would be. They sat in silence for a while. The machines beeped. Elena breathed. Outside the window, the city was dark except for scattered lights, people sleeping in their beds, living their normal lives. There's something else, Grace said gently. I've been doing more research into Miss Reyes's life. I found some information that might help you understand her better. She pulled out a folder and opened it. Inside were printouts of articles and documents. After her mother died, Elena left Boston. She spent 2 years volunteering with disaster relief organizations. She was in Haiti after the earthquake, in Puerto Rico after the hurricane. She worked with Doctors Without Borders for 6 months in a refugee camp. David stared at the documents. I didn't know any of this. She came back here 3 years ago specifically to work with New Horizons. According to her application letter, which I managed to get from Yolanda, she wrote that she wanted to stop running from her past and start building something meaningful in the place she'd once called home. Grace showed him another document. It was Elena's will, filed with a lawyer 2 years ago. She left everything she has to a scholarship fund for children of immigrants. There's not much, but it's something. And in her medical directives section, she was very clear. No extraordinary measures if there was no reasonable expectation of recovery. Quality of life over quantity. David took the paper with shaking hands and read Elena's own words. She'd thought about this. She'd made her wishes known, just not directly to him. She didn't want to be kept alive as a vegetable. No, she wanted to live with purpose or not at all. David closed his eyes and let the tears fall. All this time he'd been angry at Elena for leaving, for choosing her career over him, for breaking his heart. But she'd been punishing herself for that choice ever since. She'd spent 15 years trying to make up for what she saw as her biggest mistake, helping others because she couldn't help herself, giving everything because she felt she deserved nothing. And now, in this horrible moment, he had the chance to give her the one thing she'd asked for: peace. "I need to make some calls," David said, wiping his eyes. Over the next hour, he did something he should have done earlier. He reached out to the people in Elena's phone: the volunteer coordinator at the ESL program, the apartment manager, Mr. Chen, who answered groggily but became alert when he heard what was happening. A woman named Rita who worked at New Horizons and started crying when she heard the news. They came. At 4 in the morning, they started arriving. People Elena had helped, people she'd worked with, people whose lives she'd touched. A Syrian family with 3 children who Elena had helped settle in the city. A young woman from Guatemala whose asylum case Elena had supported. Co-workers who'd seen her dedication even if they'd never gotten past her walls. Yolanda arrived with coffee and hugs, organizing the growing group in the waiting room. She touched so many lives, she told David. She never understood how much she mattered to people. David watched them all gather, these pieces of Elena's life that she'd kept separate from each other and from her past. They were her family in a way, the family she'd built through kindness and service and quiet dedication. Around 5 in the morning, David made his decision. He found Dr. Patel and said the words that felt like both a betrayal and a gift. No surgery. Comfort care. Let her go peacefully. Dr. Patel nodded, his expression respectful. I think that's what she would have wanted. We'll make sure she's comfortable. You can stay with her as long as you like. David went back to Elena's room. He sat beside her bed and took her hand, careful of the IV lines. Her hand was warm, alive, but soon it wouldn't be. He thought about all the years they'd lost, all the conversations they'd never had, all the forgiveness that had come too late. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm sorry I was angry for so long. I'm sorry you felt like you couldn't reach out. I'm sorry we wasted all this time. He pulled out his phone and did something he probably should have done days ago. He called Amy, and when she answered, worried and half asleep, he told her everything. About Elena, about their past, about the letter and the regret and the impossible choice he'd just made. And Amy, because she was good and kind and understood that love was complicated, told him she'd be there in 20 minutes.